Since the early 2000s, Disney has been trying everything in their power to recapture the magic of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. With numerous failed attempts at a new franchise, they accidentally created a new subgenre of films in the process. A subgenre I like to call the failed next big thing. With most of the films I've covered in this series, they are usually failures both at the box office and critically. For example, look at John Carter and The Lone Ranger, which are both ranked as some of the biggest box office bombs of all time. But with the topic of today's video, 2013's Oz the Great and Powerful, the story is different. Oz the Great and Powerful did pretty well at the box office, as it grossed $493 million against a $215 million budget. Even though this film did well commercially, it still failed to launch a new film franchise set in the world of Oz, as there was never a sequel made. So today, let's take a look at Oz the Great and Powerful to try and understand why it never started a film franchise, and why it never reached the potential it could have had. The concept for Disney's Oz the Great and Powerful came from a pitch meeting between screenwriter Mitchell Kapner and producer Joe Roth in 2009, where they came up with the idea of telling the origin story of the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. Roth had Kapner write a story treatment which he brought to the then chairman of Walt Disney Studios, Dick Cook. Cook loved the idea and commissioned Kapner to write the screenplay, while Roth got to work finding a director. The script was brought to Sam Raimi, who was the director behind the Evil Dead series and the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy. He was initially hesitant to the idea of touching the Wizard of Oz legacy, since it's such a beloved and influential film. However, when he realized it was its own story that took place long before the original film, he fell in love with the idea. Raimi officially signed on to the project in 2010, and he brought on David Lindsay-Abaire for a rewrite on the script. The title character was originally offered to Robert Downey Jr. numerous times, who declined the role numerous times. It was then offered to Disney's golden boy, Johnny Depp, who loved the role, but had to pass on it because he was working on another movie for Disney, which was 2013's The Lone Ranger. Hopefully it worked out well for him. Oz was just 5 months away from production when they finally found their lead with James Franco, who was brought in by Raimi, who had previously worked with him in the Spider-Man movies. Principal photography kicked off on July 25th of 2011 at Raleigh, Michigan Studios in Pontiac, Michigan. The choice was made by the filmmakers to shoot the entire film in the studio with no on-location shooting. Here's a quote from Slash Film on the process. "The entire film was shot on sound stages, and not one frame was shot outside. Raimi says he couldn't even shoot a sky because none of the landscapes in Oz could even fit in our reality." And yeah, you can really tell this movie was shot entirely inside because it looks like shit. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My review will be at the end. Sam Raimi enlisted the help from the art director from Avatar and Alice in Wonderland, Robert Stromberg, to construct all these different sets, and then used green screens to add in the background pieces. Production wrapped on December 11th of 2011, although it was followed by some brief reshoots. One aspect that complicated the making of this film was the issue of copyright. Oz the Great and Powerful is based on the L. Frank Baum books of the early 1900s, which are in public domain. But the iconic 1939 film, The Wizard of Oz, is owned by Warner Brothers. So Disney had to toe a fine line when it came to copyright infringement, so that their film wasn't too similar to the 1939 film. This means they couldn't use any of the original characters' likeness from the 1939 movie, and this boiled down to some very minute aspects of the characters. For example, they couldn't reference the ruby slippers, they couldn't use the signature chin mole from Margaret Hamilton's portrayal of the Wicked Witch of the West, and they had to use a different shade of green for Mila Kunis's character. Things got really petty when Warner Brothers filed a trademark for The Great and Powerful Oz 1 week after Disney filed a trademark for Oz the Great and Powerful. But Warner Brothers' trademark did end up getting suspended by the US Patent and Trademark Office. Danny Elfman was chosen to score the film, and Mariah Carey recorded a promotional single called Almost Home, which released with the film. In post-production, Raimi had a bit of a back and forth with Disney and the MPAA to tone down the film, since a lot of the scenes were deemed too scary for a PG movie, which is very on brand for Raimi's style. Leading up to its release, many media outlets predicted the film would perform around the same as 2010's Alice in Wonderland, which grossed $1 billion for the company. Oz the Great and Powerful debuted at number 1 at the box office on March 8th of 2013, with an opening weekend gross of $79 million, It remained at the top of the box office for one more week until it was dethroned by The Croods. In the US, it made $234 million, and overseas it made $258 million, for a total worldwide gross of $493 million. Not quite Alice in Wonderland numbers, but it was still a great take. However, the reviews for the film were not very kind. It has a 2.6 stars out of 5 on Letterboxd and a 44% score on Metacritic. It also currently holds a 57% critic and a 56% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. The critic consensus reads, "It suffers from some tonal inconsistencies and a deflated sense of wonder, but Oz the Great and Powerful still packs enough visual dazzle and clever wit to be entertaining in its own right." Contrary to many films that fall into the failed next big thing category, this film didn't bomb, and it actually made a fair bit of money. Deadline Hollywood calculated the net profit of this film to be around $36 million. But Disney never launched a new franchise with this film, which is odd since they dumped so much money into making it, promoting it, and getting the general audience invested in the movie. You would think, since the film actually made some money and there's some more source material to pull from, Disney would have jumped at the chance to make a sequel. Following Oz the Great and Powerful's release, it was announced that Disney was planning on making a sequel, as they commissioned Kapner to write a follow-up script. And in 2013, Mila Kunis said in an interview with E! News that they were all signed on for sequels. However, this potential sequel would not have Sam Raimi at the helm. In an interview with Bleeding Cool, he said this, "I did leave some loose ends for another director if they want to make the picture. I was attracted to the story, but I don't think the second one would have the thing I would need to get me interested." Additionally, Tim Roth confirmed that this sequel would not involve Dorothy and the gang, since there's still a 20-year gap between the events of Oz the Great and Powerful and The Wizard of Oz, so the story would have taken place during this time. But all of those interviews from 2013 are the last updates we've had on the project, as it has been absolutely radio silent since. However, there still is an IMDb page for the project that says the film is still in development, and it even has a plot description. The plot is as follows. Oz and Glinda have their firstborn child named Olivia. They don't tell Olivia that an evil spell has been cast on her by someone she never knew. But since the film has been in development for the past 11 years, I think it's very likely the project was quietly cancelled. There's no definitive reason why it was cancelled, and there was no sources I could find to explain it, so all we can do is speculate. I think the reason this film never got a sequel is because it didn't have anyone at Disney who really fought for it or was heavily invested in it. Throughout Oz the Great and Powerful's production, it went through 3 different chairmen at Disney Studios, so it never had someone at the top who was heavily invested in the creation or success of it. Here's a quote from The Hollywood Reporter. "Raimi's own Yellow Brick Road has spanned 3 separate regimes at the studio, from that of Dick Cook, who commissioned the screenplay, to the one led by Ross, who greenlighted the film, to the current empire of Alan Horn, who has the task of supporting a film that has already wrapped when he was named studio chairman in May. Additionally, Alan Horn left Disney in 2020, so now there's someone in charge that never even had a hand in the film. This is a project that was being pushed by Sam Raimi and Joe Roth, and not really a project that was being pushed by Disney itself. And once Sam Raimi lost interest, the film was just thrown on the back burner and wasn't given top priority. Post-2013, top priority at Disney included the MCU, Star Wars, and live-action remakes of their classic animated films, as those are all properties that were surefire hits. A sequel to Oz the Great and Powerful wasn't a surefire hit, as there's no telling if it was a film that could do big numbers. Just look at what happened to the sequel to Alice in Wonderland, which is a property that Oz the Great and Powerful was being compared to. The first film made $1 billion, but 6 years later, Alice Through the Looking Glass didn't even crack $300 million. I think the copyright troubles Disney ran into while making Oz the Great and Powerful also factored into Disney's reluctance to pursue more films in this world, since they had to go through great lengths and headaches to make sure they didn't step on Warner Brothers' toes. And lastly, the most obvious reason Disney didn't make a sequel to Oz the Great and Powerful is because the movie just wasn't very good. Alright, strap in because I have a lot of thoughts about this film that I need to get out. This movie was such a big disappointment. The script and story were actually pretty solid, but it was ruined by some terrible execution. It's a bad sign if the best part of the movie is the part that doesn't take place in Oz. Usually, with movies like this, the faraway fantasy world is supposed to be the good part, and the everyday life in the normal world is supposed to be the boring part. But it's the complete opposite in this movie. For the first 15 minutes, I was really digging the movie, and I had my hopes high. The way the filmmakers were able to capture the 1930s aesthetic and pay homage to the original Wizard of Oz was really cool. From the set design to the cinematography to the editing, it felt really authentic. And the aspect ratio shift in the introduction of color was also really cool. But once we actually get to Oz, then all the magic is lost and we enter a lifeless CGI mess. The budget of this film was $215 million. But I don't know what the hell they spent all that money on, because this movie looks so ugly. There are baffling special effects that I'm shocked made it to the final cut. You can tell that this is a Sam Raimi movie, as it has all the good aspects of his style and all the bad aspects of his style. A lot of the criticisms you see people throw at Multiverse of Madness on how ugly that film is are on full display in this film as well. There are some terrible green screen effects that took me out of the film, and so many locations that just felt lifeless. It reminded me a lot of the Disney Plus Star Wars shows, where a location just feels like an empty lot with no detail, and the space doesn't feel lived in. They had the opportunity to do something really cool with the doll character, and make them a marionette puppet or a practical effect, but they went the lame route and just made them a CGI character. And what's crazy is they actually did make a puppet for this film. They went through all the work to make an 18-inch tall China Girl marionette, hire a puppeteer to operate it, film all the scenes with the puppet, and then take the puppet out in post-production and replace it with a CGI puppet. I had to include this quote from that Slash Film article about this because it is just ridiculous. The puppet has 21 strings, has full head movement and animated eyes. It takes on average 300 man-hours to build a puppet. At 10 hours a day, working 5 days a week, that is almost 2 months to create a single marionette. He produced 2 China Girl puppets for the film. Huber wears a blue leotard while operating China Girl on set, and has an earpiece which a feed of Joey's performance and a direct line to Sam for direction. They literally did all this work to give the characters something to interact with, and then they didn't include it in the film. It is baffling to me, and it was so disappointing to learn about. One of the best parts of the original Wizard of Oz is the costumes and the inventive practical effects, but this film has none of that, and it turns all these opportunities to do something cool into lifeless CGI characters. I hate this movie so much because it had so much potential to be good. Like, there are glimpses and scenes that are really good, and I started to get hope that maybe the film will turn around. But then they are followed by the worst scene ever. I thought the China Girl's introduction scene was really great and heartfelt, and it felt like James Franco was actually trying to act in that scene. And the plan at the end to trick the witches with the projections was really cool and fun to watch. But unfortunately, those types of scenes are few and far between. And we gotta talk about some of the performances in this movie. Oh my god, does James Franco suck. Not only as a person, but as an actor too. He is such a hack. I almost hate him as much as I hate Jared Leto. For most of this movie, it feels like he's not trying at all. There are so many line deliveries where it either sounds like he just woke up, or he's reading the script for the first time. I'm not even the biggest fan of Johnny Depp, but I wish he was cast in this role because at least he would have put in some effort. Mila Kunis also gives a pretty lackluster performance, as she is really hard to believe as this evil witch character. It certainly doesn't help that I know her as Meg from Family Guy, so whenever she's talking, all I see is Meg, so that, you know, that's not the film's fault, that's my fault. And it also doesn't help that her character isn't written very well, and her turn to the dark side is so flimsy and underdeveloped. Like, she gets her heart broken once, and then decides to commit war crimes on the people of Oz. Like, come on. Get a grip, girl. I want to end my review with a quote from Justin Chang from Variety, as he summed up the film best in my opinion. In a real sense, Oz the Great and Powerful has a certain kinship with George Lucas's Star Wars prequels, in the way it presents a beautiful but borderline sterile digital update of a world that was richer, purer, and a lot more fun in lower tech form. Here, too, the actors often look artificially superimposed against their CG backdrops, though the intensity of the fakery generates its own visual fascination. It's like watching a car crash, you can't look away. Overall, a very disappointing film, and the few quality scenes make it even worse. because we are shown how good this film could have been, if more effort was put into the execution. Oz the Great and Powerful, more like Oz the Stupid and Terrible.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Okay, let's wrap it up. Oz the Great and Powerful is one of those rare Disney films that performed well at the box office, but never got a sequel. Although there was a lot of hype when it first came out, the film has pretty much been forgotten about, and any plans for a sequel have been stuck in development hell ever since. It's now been over 10 years since the film came out, and I doubt we will ever get another film. And if we do, James Franco surely won't be starring in it. So that's the story of Oz the Great and Powerful, Disney's failed next big thing. What are your thoughts on the film? Would you consider it a success, a failure, or somewhere in between? Do you think this franchise could have had potential? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, make sure to check out the others in the series and maybe even subscribe. This has been Tom from Eisenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.